My friend Anna and I were staying in an old motel in the middle of Nebraska for the night. We were on a week-long camping trip, checking out national parks and camping in nature. However, on this particular night, there was a huge rainstorm coming, so we decided it would be smart to stay in a hotel room to avoid a terrible, stormy night of sleeping outside and getting all our gear soaked. The closest motel we found was a small, cheap strip of rooms in the middle of nowhere. We booked our room for the night from a redneck-looking guy working at the front desk. The rain started early in the evening, so we ended up staying in our room all night, drinking and playing some games to pass the time. Anna and I went to bed around midnight, and it was easy to fall asleep to the sound of the rain pouring down all around us. At some point in the night, I woke up. Not exactly sure why, but I noticed there was light pouring into our room. I sat up in bed and glanced toward the door where the light was coming from. We had chain-locked the door so it could only be opened just a crack, and as I became fully awake, I realized that's where the light was coming from. A slim sliver of light shone all the way into the room, stretching across the floor to the foot of my bed. A quick glance over at the bed next to me confirmed that Anna was still sleeping, and it wasn't her who had opened the door. Now, fully awake, I decided to get out of bed and check it out. Once I got past the foot of my bed, the doorway came into view, and I was shocked by what I saw. The door was indeed open a crack, just as much as the chain would allow, and an arm was reaching through the crack, fumbling around, trying to undo the chain. That was the only thing keeping the door from being completely opened. Instincts and adrenaline immediately kicked in. I ran toward the door and slammed my full body weight against it, forcefully closing the door on the arm that was still reaching through the crack. I heard a grunt on the other side, and the arm withdrew from the crack, and whoever was on the other side disappeared. Anna, who had been awakened by all the commotion, called the police, telling them there was an attempted intruder at the motel. It was close to 5 a.m. now, and even though it was early, Anna and I agreed to pack up our stuff and hit the road. As we left our motel room, the police were already at the front desk, talking to the worker. A cop approached us and asked if we were okay and if we saw who the culprit was. The man who had been working at the front desk also appeared, repeatedly claiming that he didn't see anyone while he was working. Strangely enough, he was holding his right arm gingerly, and even when he wasn't holding it, pretending to cross his arms, it hung oddly at his side. Before we headed out, we told the cops that we suspected it was the guy working at the front desk who had tried to enter our room. They said they would look into it, and that was the only information we were given before we drove off to continue our journey. I have no idea if they ever confirmed that the man at the front desk was the one who had tried to enter our room. However, it was comforting to me that even if he didn't face legal actions for that night, I had either broken his arm or severely injured it. Hopefully, that would stop him from trying something like that again. A group of friends and I took a vacation to France together to enjoy the sights and party a bit. The hotel we were staying in for a couple of nights was fairly nice, and we were happy with it for the price we had spent. It wasn't a super luxurious, high-class hotel, but it had some amenities and was decent. On the last night of our trip, we went out as a group to party and have a good time. We arrived back at our hotel late, but since it was the last night of the trip, we stayed up, still talking in the hotel room and drinking a little more. Suddenly, there was a loud banging at the door. We all got quiet, and one of my friends went to look through the peephole into the hallway, but they didn't see anything. We realized we had gotten pretty loud, and possibly, as we were all drunk, it must have been another guest nearby, fed up trying to shut us up. It was close to 3 a.m. now, so we lowered the volume of our voices and began to prepare for bed. 5 minutes after the knock, we heard more knocking at our door. This time, we were positive that we weren't being too loud anymore, and once again, my friend went to check the peephole. This time, there was a guy standing outside the door. We all took turns staring through the peephole, and the man just stood there waiting for us to open the door. I guess the man knocked again, still waiting for us to open up. My friend Audrey spoke to the man without opening the door. She asked, "Can we help you?" The man on the other side of the door responded, saying that he had a wallet that one of us had dropped at the club earlier that night. We frantically searched our belongings, checking to see whose wallet we had lost. After a short search, we all stared at each other silently in confusion. None of us were missing a wallet, ID, or anything. Everything was accounted for. I watched through the peephole as Audrey told the man that we weren't missing anything and that it must be someone else's wallet. The man didn't move at all, standing frozen outside our door. He knocked 2 more times within a span of 3 minutes. We called the front desk at the hotel and asked them to come up to our room to deal with the guy, who was still standing outside asking us to open the door so he could give us the wallet. 2 staff members came up to our room and tried to gently push the man away from our door and out of the building. He tried to fight them. The man squared up and attempted to throw multiple punches before being taken to the ground by the 2 workers. Eventually, law enforcement came and took him away. This guy, who had been attempting to enter our room, clearly had something wrong with him. It was unsettling to think he had been watching and following us the whole night, from the club all the way back to our hotel room. I was traveling alone for a business conference, and the budget didn't stretch to high-end hotels. I found a small, inexpensive one online, situated on the edge of a town. It looked decent enough in the photos, though they were clearly outdated. The reviews were mixed. Some people had good experiences, and others complained about odd noises and strange happenings. I shrugged it off as an exaggeration. I was only going to be there for a couple of nights, and I figured I wouldn't have any problems. The check-in process when I got there was very uneventful. The clerk was an elderly man who didn't say much beyond handing me the key. I headed to my room, which was at the end of a long, narrow hallway. The carpet was worn, and the walls had patches where the paint was peeling. The hotel was definitely older than the pictures online showed and needed some serious renovations. I went about my usual routine of unpacking, setting up my laptop, and getting some work done. Around 10 p.m., I decided to get some rest. The bed was uncomfortable, but I managed to fall asleep fairly quickly. I woke up in the middle of the night to a loud banging noise coming from the room next door. It was relentless, like someone was hitting the wall or furniture repeatedly. I thought about calling the front desk, but decided against it because I was very tired and hoped that it would stop soon. The banging persisted. It was unnerving, but I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. Just when I started to drift off again, I heard something that made me sit up in bed. There was a faint whispering coming from the hallway. It was soft, but distinct enough to make out words like "help" and "please." I told myself it was probably just someone talking loudly outside, maybe another guest who was drunk or having an argument. I got up to check the hallway. I peered through the peephole but saw nothing unusual. The corridor was empty and quiet now, except for a distant hum, which I assumed was the old heating system. I returned to bed, feeling a bit uneasy, but I tried to shake it off. I closed my eyes and finally fell asleep. The next morning, I noticed the door to my room was slightly open. I was sure I had closed it properly before going to sleep. I brushed it off as me being forgetful. When I went downstairs for breakfast, I asked the elderly clerk at the desk if he had any idea about the noises from the previous night. He just gave me a non-committal nod and said he didn't know. I spent the day at the conference trying to forget the night's disturbances. By the evening, I was back at the hotel and exhausted. I had hoped for a quiet night, but when I entered my room, I noticed something odd. My laptop, which had been on the desk when I left, was now on the bed. I hadn't touched it after finishing my work. That night, I was more cautious. I made sure everything was secure and tried to get some sleep. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud crash. It sounded like something heavy had fallen in the room next door. I didn't want to deal with the banging and whispering again, so I tried to stay calm. I could hear faint footsteps moving around in the corridor, but I didn't want to investigate. Then I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the closet. I was too scared to get up, so I lay in bed, wide awake, listening. The scratching continued, growing louder and more frantic. It felt like something or someone was trying to get out. I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed, turned on the light, and opened the closet. There was nothing inside but a few old hangers and some extra blankets. The next morning, I packed up quickly, relieved to be done with the place. As I checked out, I asked the clerk if there had been any recent issues with the rooms. He looked at me with a somber expression and said that sometimes guests reported strange experiences. He didn't offer any further explanation. I did some research later and found out that the hotel had a history of being associated with accidents and unexplained events. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night, but I'm glad that I don't have to stay there again. I used to work the night shift at a small hotel by the highway. It's usually quiet after midnight, just a few late arrivals and the occasional call. But this one night was different. It started with a phone call at 1 a.m. The voice on the phone said, "I need a room." I checked the reservation system, but we were fully booked for the night. I responded, saying that we didn't have any vacancies, and asked if they had a reservation. The voice didn't answer right away. Finally, they just said they needed a room and it was important. Without a reservation, I couldn't give them a room, but I informed them of nearby hotels available before hanging up. About an hour later, a man walked in. I greeted him, and he handed me a crumpled piece of paper. It had a room number scratched on it, room 217, and a note saying, "I need this room. No one else should know." I looked at him, feeling uneasy. I responded, "I'm sorry, but room 217 isn't available right now." The man didn't say anything. He just pulled out a stack of cash and slammed it on the counter, nodding at me to take it as a bribe. I was getting more uncomfortable, but boldly stated that I couldn't help him without an ID or a reservation, and asked him to leave if he didn't have either of those. He looked at me for a long moment and then turned and walked out. I felt a shiver as the door closed behind him. I decided to check the security monitors, and everything seemed normal as far as I could tell. At 3 a.m., I heard a loud bang from upstairs. I grabbed the master key card and went to investigate. When I reached the second floor, I noticed that the door to room 217 was slightly ajar. My heart started racing. I pushed the door open a bit more and peered inside. The room was dark, but I saw enough to know something was wrong. The bed was messed up, and there was a handkerchief on the floor stained with something dark. I backed away quickly. I saw movement at the end of the hallway and turned to see the man from earlier standing there. I didn't wait any longer or try to confront him. Instead, I ran back downstairs and called the police. When they arrived, the man was gone. They checked the hotel security footage, but the video from that time was corrupted. They didn't find anything else in room 217 except the handkerchief. I never found out what happened. The police couldn't explain it, and I was left feeling uneasy. I ended up moving on from working at that hotel a couple of months later and was glad to be able to put that night out of my mind. One October night many years ago, when we were young adults, my friend Mike and I were driving back after a fun road trip. We decided to check into a hotel later in the evening since we weren't going to make it all the way home and didn't want to drive through the night. Mike and I decided to unwind in the hot tub at the hotel. There wasn't much to do in the small town we were staying in, and after being on the road all day, the warmth of the hot tub was exactly what we needed. After checking in at the front desk, we changed into our swimsuits and headed down to the outdoor pool area. The pool itself was closed for maintenance, some sort of chemical treatment, but the hot tub was open. The night was clear and the stars were visible, but the area around the hot tub was poorly lit, casting long shadows over everything. Mike and I settled into the tub, and it ended up being exactly what we needed to unwind before bed. We talked about our day, our plans for the next day, and just caught up on life. After a while, the conversation drifted to more trivial things, like our old high school days, funny incidents, and random stuff. As we talked, we noticed a figure on the edge of the pool area. At first, we thought it was just someone from another room coming out for a late-night dip. But as time passed, the figure didn't move. It was just a man standing there, looking at us. I whispered to Mike, asking if he saw that, and motioned towards the guy near the edge of the pool. Mike squinted through the dim lighting and responded that he could see him. He asked me what the man was doing, but I couldn't make out much. The figure was tall and wearing dark clothing. I could see the silhouette clearly, but the person's face was obscured by the darkness. I wasn't sure if the figure was just deciding if he wanted to swim in the pool, even though it was closed, or if there was something else going on. We continued our conversation, trying to ignore the stranger, but it was hard not to feel uneasy. The man did not move. He just stood there as if waiting for something. Finally, Mike decided to call out. He asked the man if he was waiting for the pool and mentioned that it was closed. There was no response from the man, and he didn't even flinch. His presence made everything feel tense. Mike glanced at me, indicating that we should maybe go inside for the night. I nodded in agreement. We started getting out of the hot tub, but just then the man turned and walked away. He moved slowly, almost deliberately. It was odd. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. We watched him disappear into the dark, and we didn't speak until he was out of sight. Then we went to our room and locked the door behind us, making sure the chain was also secure. We joked about it, trying to laugh off the strange encounter, but neither of us could shake the feeling of unease. We turned off the lights and went to bed, but neither of us slept well. In the morning, we were eager to leave. We packed up our things and, after turning in our keys at the front desk, we were on our way. A few days later, Mike showed me an article in the paper about a man who had been found dead in the area near the hotel. It was ruled an accident, but the details were chilling. He had been living in the woods nearby and frequently came to the hotel's hot tub. His body had been found floating in the pool that was closed off for maintenance. We never saw the face of the man who was at the pool with us that night, so we couldn't determine if it was the same person pictured in the paper. Regardless, the man who was watching us that night by the pool had either been killed or had killed someone, or perhaps something else.